In my last talk, I presented the highlights of the budget of financial year 22. In this talk, which is titled Regrow India, I put the budget reforms in a longer term perspective, particularly in the context of what other reforms have been done during the past 12 to 18 months. I want to highlight the change in approach and the change in attitudes and policies that have occurred over the last 18 months or so. I do this in the budgeting perspective, as I mentioned earlier, and what it portends for the future. So the change I'm talking about is from what may be called, what is the first term of PM Modi's government to the second term, which started in June 2019. Modi 1 can be, in one sentence, can be described and as viewed by many people from outside as having a tinge of protectionism and nostalgia. And this, the words "Make in India" in some sense characterize this in the eyes of critics. However, it is well to keep in mind that the IMF study done recently shows that average tariffs increased by 1.5% or less between 2014 and 19. So this is really the extent of extra protection, you could say, which has happened in Modi 1. In contrast to this, Modi 2 can be described as Atmanirbhar Bharat. So the change in Make in India to Atmanirbhar Bharat in a way captures what has happened. This represents more self-confidence, emphasis on self-reliance, which is really what the literal translation of Atmanirbhar Bharat is, and a much greater emphasis on domestic competitiveness to achieve this self-reliance. The Modi 1, in a way, the most recent was the interim budget of 2019, just before the election, which had uncomfortable echoes of the past. And in contrast, the recent budget, the budget which we have just seen and we have talked about in the previous episode, looks forward to a much brighter future. And the break, in my view, came in September 2019 with the corporate tax reforms, and especially the very surprising incentives given for movement of manufacturing supply chains to India, with the lower 50% rate for the next 3 to 5 months. What about the change in attitude? I think few people have noticed this, which is why I want to emphasize it a little more than I normally would. And the change of attitude is towards greater openness of government to outside advice. I can tell that from my personal experience, because I conveyed my personal experience of economic reforms and growth over several decades to the government through different channels in the last quarter of calendar year 2019. And as a result of it, I was invited by the CEO of NITI to talk to key secretaries of the Government of India, which he had got together. And what I said to them is in some ways summarized in the eGrow policy paper dated Jan 2020, Growth, Slowdown, Reforms and Recovery. You're all invited to go to the eGrow website and download it to see what is there. So the attitude was signaled by the policy actions from September 29 to February 2020, which is the recent budget. I think there's a very clear signals have been coming that PM Modi's government, Modi too, I would emphasize, government will do whatever is necessary to make India a modern, efficient, competitive economy. So these fears of protectionism, I think, needs to be put away into the past. The words which come to my mind, are from Gandhiji, which say something like this: I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible, but I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. And if you replace culture by technology or some other modern equivalents, then this captures, in my view, the change in attitude which has happened over the last year or so. Now, what about the change in policy, the regrow, the getting to the actions which actually, are the proof of the pudding? So the goal has shifted back to re-accelerating GDP and job growth, and as a result of that, generating the revenues to spend on the welfare of the people, the ease of living and the genuine welfare of all the people. An important aspect of this is the emphasis on domestic competition and productivity. And there is a systematic and comprehensive approach of looking at various aspects of the economy and implementing this goal and this method. So whether it's factor markets, including banking, where we'll see a little more later, whether it's natural resources, the sectors which were not so far reformed, agricultural, high-tech, social, and of course in infrastructure sector where there has been progressive reform, but making deeper and deeper reforms in all aspects of infrastructure, including of course transport, power, electricity, and urban. Let's take up these one by one. Factor markets. The basic approach is to simplification, more flexibility, and competition in factor markets. So what are these factor markets? Debt markets. The insolvency and bankruptcy code is really was a huge step. I have, in my 25 years in government, I've seen many different actions, including SARFAESI and all that, and the fact that the new corporate tax in 2019 didn't even have a single chapter on bankruptcy. We were all expecting that reform would be used to at least introduce bankruptcy. So this IBC was a big reform on the debt market, but it also has complementary benefits in terms of what we call markets for management and ownership. It's a little technical for the common man, but the point is that a modern efficient system also requires that shareholders be able to replace management and ownership. And so far, this IBC will help move India in this direction. For 60 or more years, we've had basically monopoly managements of various forms. The job market. You are all familiar by now with the how the 17 different labor codes at the central level were reduced to 4. One a year or so ago, and 3 more in the last year. Land markets. Of course, there were some initial reforms in 2014, though the full reforms couldn't take place, but to supplement and complement them, the government has moved towards making land banks for infrastructure and industrial estates. For example, the textile ones announced in the budget. Reforms in the capital markets, financial markets, the single financial code, one regulator, which was announced in the budget, is an example of that. Further movements on the gold exchange are others. Equity markets, so think of FDI as part of the reform of the equity market, FDI and FII. In 2003, I was member secretary of the FDI committee, which drafted a roadmap for FDI reform. The chairman of that committee was Mr. N.K. Singh, and which now, by now, with this 75% FDI and insurance announced in the budget, everything that we had considered and envisioned in that committee report has now been implemented. There will of course be new things which come, which will need further thought or action. And finally, the banking and insurance, which again we'll have more to say. Banking and insurance. So the key change here, which I think people are finally beginning to appreciate, is the strategic industry and policy, which in basic broad format was approved by the cabinet a couple of months ago. But the key point, which I have repeatedly said for the last 2 months since it was announced, is that this is going to provide a framework for privatization. That's the key importance of this new strategic industry policy. And of course, it's now not just words or policies on paper. The budget makes this very concrete by a whole series of actions, the most important of which is the privatization proposed of 2 public sector banks. Hints of this were given in last year, actually, the year before, when the consolidation of banks were taken place, and a few, if I recall correctly, 3 or 4 banks were left out of this consolidation. So one has been expecting this, but there's finally action proposed in the budget. Now, the importance of this arises from the Bank Nationalization Act, which is a 50-year-old act which no government has been brave enough, bold enough to touch, and it will have to be amended to make this possible. So it's a big change. Then actions on reducing PSB regulatory risk, because of the multiple layers through which public sector companies, and particularly public sector banks and insurance companies, have to go through in the constitutional governmental system related to anti-corruptions, etc. There is huge risk, and we've been struggling to find a way. You know, you've all heard of bad bank, which has been tossed around for the last 5-6 years or even earlier. So finally, the government has taken the bull by the horns and announced the formation of asset reconstruction company and asset management company. The importance of this is as a risk reducing measure to put a layer between the bank management and the whole parliamentary constitutional system of review of decisions from the perspective of corruption. So finally, the NPA problem can start getting solved. The NPAs in public sector banks. The private sector banks are a different thing. That the regulator, the RBI, is perfectly competent to push forward that. But the public sector NPA problem was being held up by this huge risk faced by public sector bank managers. And this was another action which has been promised in the budget is IDBI privatization. Insurance, 1 out of the 4 general insurance companies are to be privatized. And LIC disinvestment, which was also mentioned in earlier budgets, I think is re-mentioned, but will now occur. So natural resources, again systematic, one by one reforms touching all aspects. So coal, oil, minerals. In earlier years, competitive auctions were announced. This is a critical move. You know, you may not appreciate now, but I have worked for 20 years or 15 to 20 years to introduce competitive auctions in natural resources. Why? Because I did research in natural resource auctions 30 or 40 years ago, which showed that this was the only way to take public resources and give them out for private investment. So this was a very important move of reform, which happened a couple of years ago, but is now recently extended to minerals. The cabinet have approved the mineral policy, and the second element is moving from government monopoly to competition. All these natural resources were in some form or another government monopoly, and competition is now being introduced. And as I said, the mineral policy has not been fully announced, but I'm sure it will be based similar to the coal and oil policies, which will bring in genuine competition for increasing productivity and efficiency of this sector. And one of the key extra elements of this mineral policy is to link exploration and development on one side and production and marketing on the other. And this is vital because if there was no incentive and each of these was separate, say a company which discovered oil or minerals then had to bid again for the development rights, and then it had to bid again for production or marketing rights. So there was no incentive for anybody to come in to discover the oil, for example, or discover a new mineral, develop and produce it. So this change is very important. And then just for completeness, I also mentioned a number of actions taken on environment, because environment is also a natural resource like air, water, which we must preserve for many reasons. I'll just list some of these things that government, to show that government has not neglected any of the natural resources. So solar power, the International Solar Alliance, the move from BS4 to BS6 environmental regulation for automobiles, the auto scrapping policy which has been introduced in this budget, the urban metro rails which have been expanded again in the budget, though they were introduced, the budgeting was introduced several years ago, but it's been expanded. The move towards defining the rules for electric vehicles and develop charging stations. The Ujwala cooking gas, we think of this as just many people think that's just a welfare measure, but to supply anti-poverty, but it's not. It replaces kerosene and fuel wood, which are deadly air polluters in poor households, especially in rural areas. So this cooking gas has replaced this polluting element. So again, the environment which matters in Indian conditions. And finally, Swachh Bharat, Jal Jeevan, water, cleaning water. These are all have the collateral benefit of, though they may be welfare measures, they also have good benefits on environment in terms and health. Then the third of element, the unreformed sectors, again gives a measure of that nothing is being neglected. Each sector, each aspect is being systematically addressed. So strategic and starting with strategic and high-tech sectors, defense, aerospace, atomic energy, opened up for private competition, private PPP, and so on. So moving from government monopoly to private competition, including FDI. Here I want to give you a small example of what has already happened in aerospace, which I happen to have heard of from the entrepreneurs. A young graduate from Stanford University, along with his professors and students, set up a company in the aerospace field, and is now he's already been active in India for the last few months. But since this policy is announced, this whole structure will be rolled out, where they have developed cheap receivers and efficient use of satellite channels, communications, to connect the whole of the country. Now, of course, it's a little more expensive than Jio or Airtel, but the fact is that this covers areas which the telephone network doesn't cover, including up to 300 kilometers off the coast. So text messages, machine-to-machine communication will all become possible when this is rolled out by this company in the next few months. Digital infrastructure, Aadhaar, UPI, FinStech, BharatNet, these are all government programs. So the careful definition of where government can play a role in public goods and public goods infrastructure, what I call, where really the government has to take the initiative, and opening the rest of the stuff to private sector. So it's always a cooperation. It's a joint actions to promote efficiency, to promote jobs, to promote growth. And so what this digital infrastructure, the effect of the pandemic is there is a huge blooming of e-education, e-medicine, e-work from home, which is going to unroll, which has happened during the pandemic, and it's going to have big benefits as we go forward. Then coming to other sectors, clearly the biggest one was agriculture and allied sector, which was unreformed in the 91 reforms, and it's so important. It's 40% of workers, of all workers in India, 40% of them depend on it for livelihood. So we are very aware of this. People, this is something one has in quarter century of in government, one has dealt with this issue in international relations, in FTAs, etc. And it's not a new issue for us. We have always tried to protect agriculture, but it's very important to reform reform the laws which were holding back the development of new forms of agriculture. In particular, the ECA and APMCA reforms have been replaced in the last year by 3 laws, which increase the freedom to sell in e-markets in India and the world, freedom to trade, buy stock and sell. This may not have a great amount of effect on traditional crops like wheat, rice and sugar, but it'll unleash a huge amount of innovation in new crops, in new types of the standard crops. For example, organic wheat or organic rice, etc. Why? Because the key when it's a new product like ragi or coarse grains, now people are developing new versions of products, but they have to be marketed. And you cannot market and do a huge advertising campaign in a marketing channel if you are not assured of supplies. So nobody can build the supply chain unless the whole chain is assured. So production, if a person is going to develop a market for ragi or ragi snacks or some other coarse cereal, he needs to be assured that he will have a supply. You don't develop the whole supply chain and just hope that somehow these products will be available. So these changes in the law will make this kind of innovation possible. And then of course other things in the like green budget, green initiative, etc. for fruits and vegetables and credit, etc., which is a normal thing in budget. So then social sectors. Education. Remember I've gone through various aspects, and every aspect there is action now in FM Modi 2. So the new education policy was announced in last year, and the budget supports this. So again, it's not just a policy on paper, which has made it possible, for example, to attract the best universities in the world to India. Of course, it will take a little time for them to come because during the pandemic, nobody was taking new initiatives. But the budget announces a new educational commission. It sets up a national science foundation. And not only that, it provides research funds which will be distributed by this foundation. Similarly, skill development. The Apprenticeship Act, for several years I have been pressing this reform of the Apprenticeship Act with FM's pre-budget meetings because it's critical to on-the-job training. So finally it's happened. And then other issues related to skill development were also mentioned in the budget. Public health revolution. This is really amazing, and I want to spend a few minutes on this because this Swachh Bharat urban mission relating to sewage and sanitation systems in urban areas is an incredible initiative. I still remember listening to Prime Minister's first speech from Red Fort on August 2014, where he announced the Swachh Bharat mission of constructing toilets all over the country. And I was very, very happy. And probably I was the only economist who went publicly and praised this initiative. Too many people are too squeamish. So let me tell you what, and the reason was I have done research on this. And what my research showed was that there is a problem called environmental enteropathy, which results in stunting and wasting of young, less than 5-year-old people. We call this malnutrition. Malnutrition is a misnomer because it suggests that these children are not getting enough food to eat, or they are getting wrong kind of nutrition, etc. But it's much more than that. When these children live in an unsanitary environment, flowing with sewage in monsoons and so on, then this disease, it's an inflammation of the guts which does not allow the absorption of the nutrition. So I call it revolutionary because you would see in 5 to 10 years the excessive stunting and wasting which characterizes Indian children, particularly in the urban slums of India. You will see a visible change in this. Then, of course, other elements in the budget include the National Center for Disease Control, Regional Research Center to be set up by with the WHO, district hospital upgrades which become necessary after seeing the pandemic, health portal. So a whole set of very well thought, very focused reforms on the public health system. Infrastructure. Let's start with power and urban and then move on to transport. Well, this is an old one, started I think really in earnest in the early 2000s, and the approach has been systematic unbundling of different aspects of infrastructure and pulling out those which can be privatized successfully. Privatization is no use unless it gives competition, because only in a competitive market will the consumers get the full benefit of this competition. So for example, in electricity, the production, transmission and distribution have been separated out, because production is the easiest to introduce private market competition in the market, and this has been done for some time. Initially there were hiccups and some inefficiencies, but now we've got the hang of it, and it will gradually become very competitive. Transmission is something which has to be a kind of monopoly. So government through the Transmission Corporation of India has kept ownership of it and tried to get disinvestment and involvement of users in it. But now in this budget, it's also introducing, it's identifying assets owned by TCI which can be managed by the private sector in PPP mode to get the most efficiency out of it. But the trade infrastructure, for example, the electricity exchange was set up by the TCI, but it functions efficiently for supply and demand and in a competitive framework. So parts of things which can be competitive are being private in PPP, and other modes are being introduced. Now distribution is a difficult thing. The 2003 Electricity Act introduced a very revolutionary concept of consumer choice and competition in distribution, but it's really what we call benchmark competition, because in many places you can't have you can't have two different distribution networks. So the idea is open access. That means the distribution, there may be only one electricity line, but different suppliers can use it to supply electricity to the consumer, whether it's an industry or so on. And one of the, besides consumer choice, I think the important thing here is that industry is being taxed by the DISCOMs right now. And this is having a big negative effect on electricity using industry. So again, the budget is, there is a Electricity Reform Amendment Act which is there in Parliament, but government is also trying to give incentives for smart meters, feeder separation, etc. So the DISCOM becomes, especially the state electricity DISCOMs, become more efficient and don't have to rely on this huge tax on industry, which tremendously increases their costs and has a negative effect on growth and employment. And again, the urban bus service, the budget again gives, tries to introduce private competition in what have been state monopolies. Basically, bus services in most states are still monopolies, and the budget is trying to incentivize states to introduce private competition, including PPP mode, to improve efficiency. Again, ease of living for the common man would improve if there is competition in these bus services. Transports. There's a logistics revolution in the making, and the budget goes further by, of course, earlier, as I said, from 2003, there has been an effort to introduce private production, but in this budget, it goes further by introducing private sector into management by trying to, and also monetizing the government-owned infrastructure assets. And this is systematically mentioned. It's happened in airports, new private airports. The Urban Affairs Minister has announced that tens of new airports are going to be privatized. Plus, the budget introduced PPP services in many things which are currently owned and run by Airport Authority of India. Similarly, in ports, the private minor ports were, private sector was allowed several years ago, but the current budget introduces, identifies several major port services which can be given out to on PPP mode to private sector management. Similarly, for highways, the NHAI assets, waterways, jetties, fishing harbors have not been ignored, because multimodal transport has been recognized and again systematically developed. Gas pipeline. Gas pipeline is inherently a monopoly. So like the transmission wires and distribution wires, the approach we have is what we call benchmark competition, which is to have open access to public carrier. Again, this philosophy is already there, and now even assets of GAIL have been identified for this PPP management. Similarly, urban infrastructure, sports stadia have been identified. It may appear small, but the idea again, which I am trying to convey, that systematically the government is going, identifying assets, identifying policies which can be changed to introduce more competitiveness into the system, which will increase productivity and also quality of service to the consumer and the user. Railways, private stations were introduced again several years ago in Modi 1, actually given out to private sector to develop. Tourist trains have been introduced, but dedicated freight corridors again are still developed by IR, the Indian Railways, but a huge logistic revolution is coming for the heartland. The budget says that 2 dedicated freight corridors will be completed by June 21, which is only a few months away, and 3 more dedicated freight corridors will be set up or completed within 2 years by 2023. And this is going to introduce a logistic revolution for the heartland. What we find, the research shows that the coastal states and the coastal areas benefit a lot from external trade, but the heartland does not. And this is going to change with these fast dedicated corridors because the cost and time needed to transform goods from the heartland to the shipping points will transform the opportunities for the heartland. So this is a revolution which is coming when the June and even more 2 years later. Now let me come back to what I said about the change from Make in India to Atmanirbhar Bharat. The Make in India initiative, MII, people have accused government of taking a protectionist turn So let us get the numbers. What extent of competition? There's an IMF study which was recently released, which shows that average tariffs from increased by 1.5% from 2014 to 2019. So yes, there has been an increase in protection, but it is only 1.5%. Okay, it's not a huge and massive thing as laid out. Okay, now so it's important to be clear about magnitudes. Now, what about the future? I think the change from Make in India to Atmanirbhar Bharat is significant, and the most significant part of it is that the domestic reform for competitiveness is an essential part of it. And there's also a gradual movement toward what I call dualistic trade policy. The government has not spelled it out. I have spelled it out in my research and in my talks, but in my view, the government is gradually moving towards this. So this combination of domestic reform and dualistic trade policy will make a big difference to this approach. Now, what is this dualistic trade policy? It has two goals. The first goal is to reduce dependence on labor-intensive imports of goods in which China monopolizes exports. China and other countries, but we all know that China is become the factory of the world through asymmetric trade policy. So most of these monopolized goods are exported from China. So one goal is to diversify and reduce dependence. So the product-linked PLI initiative incentives are an indicator of this change in approach which I am talking about. But this PLI must be coordinated with targeted phased tariff protection, which does not go for, which is, if at all it's there, it should be for less than 5 years. So this coordination is very important. And the second goal is to attract US-EU supply chains into India. As I have explained in my previous talks, we are very inadequately served by supply chains, and much of the exports in the world occur through these supply chains. So what needs to be done to do this part of it? Well, so if leaving aside the targeted phase tariffs mentioned in the previous line, we need more uniform tariffs. Why? Because uniform tariffs are the only way to have equal effective protection and provide neutral protection to all. And the second aspect we need is low tariffs on manufacturers, minerals and agri raw materials. You know, it is in theory you can talk about final goods, intermediate goods, raw materials, but in practice it's very, very difficult. Okay, so if we take a targeted approach, yes, for specific items for specific period one can distinguish, but to think that we can have an overall approach where we keep picking and choosing different tariff for different thing is just wrong. It was proved wrong in the whole Indira Gandhi regime. So like I said, this is the duality. Low general tariffs on all manufactured minerals, agricultural raw materials to attract supply chain, but very specific, targeted, phased and limited tariff protection to promote efficient, to diversify supply chains. And then pursuing the second goal further would be much easier to do both these things if we had free trade agreements with USA, EU, UK and other free market developed economies. And added to this, the Supply Chain Resiliency Initiative, an excellent initiative started by Japan, but we need to encourage, to request, to tell or get US, EU, UK to adopt a similar initiative and include India in it. That's what Japan has done. So this is the external reforms which are needed to complement the domestic reform which I talked about earlier. However, there are still some domestic reforms remaining in tax and welfare. Let me quickly list them before I finish. Tax reforms are following tax reforms are necessary to give MSMEs a level playing field to improve their efficiency and of course to increase tax buoyancy. The direct tax code, the GST simplification, which of course the GST Council has to do, and welfare reforms, poverty alleviation, welfare system, poverty system. So there are three aspects to this: welfare stack, VISC, the virtual integrated smart card, and the DCT DBTM mobile wallet. And just giving a flavor of it, again I have outlined it in my earlier talks, so I won't go into it. And these can be done, in my view, during the next financial year 22. And once the welfare reform is done, it can be linked. These two, the income tax and the welfare system, can actually be linked, especially the DCT DBT part of it, with a system I call the net income transfer system. So what if we have, given what reforms have already occurred and which we hope will occur during the next financial year, what can we look forward to? What is the future of India 2030? Well, domestic reforms will drive global competitiveness, but these need to be complemented by the external reforms which I have mentioned earlier. Export growth to support faster GDP growth and efficient import substitution. We can look forward, if these things happen, despite the fact that global growth is projected to be much lower for the next decade than it has been for the past many decades. We can look forward to an average GDP growth of between 7 and 8% during the next decade. So, I'm quite hopeful that the government will do whatever is necessary to maintain and sustain growth at this level. With that, let me end. Thank you.